They were built to handle tens of millions of passengers, designed as national symbols, engineered to dominate global aviation. But today, many of them are quiet, gates unused, runways underutilized, terminals echoing with emptiness. Why do so many mega airports open at full scale and operate at half capacity? And is this a temporary pause or a billion-dollar miscalculation? Passenger numbers soared from 1.6 billion in 2004 to 4.5 billion by 2019. The world's airports were told to prepare for more, much more. Industry forecasts projected a steady climb, 3.5% growth each year, promising 6 billion travelers by 2038. The logic seemed unbreakable: rising incomes, booming cities, a new global middle class hungry for mobility. Consultants and planners pointed to the numbers. Airlines ordered new fleets. Governments drew up blueprints for terminals the size of small cities. On paper, the future was crowded, but the numbers told only half the story. Forecasts, by their nature, are bets on tomorrow. And for years, optimism outpaced reality. Analysts now estimate a consistent gap, about 0.8% per year, between projected and actual growth. That is a difference of 150 million passengers every single year, vanishing from the charts. Europe's airports felt the shortfall most acutely. In Asia, the gap was smaller, but even there, some terminals opened to fanfare and then waited for the crowds. Why did so many experts believe the surge would last? Was it faith in technology or the lure of endless growth? Every new forecast, every ambitious plan pulled the world closer to a simple equation: more passengers, more capacity, more prestige. But what happens when the forecast is wrong, when the future arrives quieter than expected? If you're fascinated by how infrastructure shapes power and how ambition can outpace reality, subscribe to see how these billion-dollar gambles play out across the globe. The answers begin in the places that built the most and waited the longest for passengers to come. Across China, the airport map changed almost overnight. In 2010, there were 175 civil airports. By 2024, that number had reached 263. Provincial leaders raced to break ground, each new terminal a promise of prosperity, each runway a statement of intent. The Civil Aviation Administration of China set the pace, targeting 74 new airports by 2020 in its 5-year plan. Local governments competed for approvals, eager to secure their place on the aviation map. Financing followed the blueprint of the state. Most projects were funded by government bonds, guaranteed by Beijing, or issued by municipalities hungry for growth. Public-private partnerships played a role, but the driving force came from policy, not profit. In cities like Chengdu, Kunming, and Hohhot, massive terminals rose from farmland, often years before the crowds arrived. The numbers told the story. Beijing Daxing opened in 2019, built for 72 million passengers. Chengdu Tianfu, 60 million. Hohhot Shengel, 22 million by 2025. The capital spent, over $150 billion in a decade, was as much about ambition as utility. For China's leaders, airports were more than infrastructure. They were symbols of modernity, tools for regional development, and trophies in the contest for national prestige. Each province wanted its own gateway, its own claim to the future. But when every city builds for scale, who fills the empty gates? Who pays for the silence echoing through vast, unfinished halls? Berlin Brandenburg Airport was supposed to be Europe's new gateway, a single hub for a unified capital, built to handle 27 million travelers a year, expandable to 40 million. The promise was German precision, delivered on a grand scale. The reality, 9 years of delay, spiraling costs, and a terminal that opened to empty halls in October 2020. Initial estimates set the budget at 2 billion euros. By the time the first flight departed, the bill had soared past 7.3 billion euros. Every delay cost millions. Fire safety failures, procurement chaos, and a revolving door of project managers turned a symbol of reunification into a case study in dysfunction. The airport's operator, Flughafen Berlin Brandenburg GmbH, was owned by the city, the state, and the federal government, yet no single authority took charge. Political pressure forced deadlines. Technical warnings were ignored. Bonuses were paid for speed, not quality. When the doors finally opened, the world had changed. The pandemic had gutted air travel. Airlines cut routes. In 2022, just under 20 million passengers passed through, a fraction of the capacity and far below the forecasts that justified the build. The gap between ambition and reality became a burden for German taxpayers. What happens when a prestige project becomes a fiscal anchor? Who answers for the silence in the terminal's echoing halls? Ambition builds airports as much as forecasts do. For national leaders, a mega-terminal is more than a place for planes. It is a statement. Bigger halls, higher towers, a promise that the future will arrive, and when it does, the country will be ready. Prestige is woven into every ribbon-cutting speech. Politicians talk of world-class gateways, of joining the ranks of global cities. Scale becomes a symbol, not just of connectivity, but of arrival on the world stage. In China, the opening of Beijing Daxing was called the gateway for a new era. In Riyadh, the new King Salman Airport is billed as a legacy project for the kingdom. Berlin's politicians spoke of reunification, not just efficiency. But the logic goes deeper than pride. Planners invoke the option value of capacity, the idea that spare gates and empty runways are not waste, but insurance. If demand surges, the airport will not choke. If a crisis hits, there is room to adapt. The rhetoric multiplies. Every job, every connection, every potential tourist is counted. The numbers justify the ambition. But who weighs the cost of building for a tomorrow that may never come? Is a half-empty terminal a prudent hedge or a monument to overconfidence? March 2020. The world stopped flying. Within weeks, global air traffic collapsed by 73%. Airports designed for crowds became silent. Gates stood empty. Runways stretched out, untouched. The shock was absolute. Mega terminals built on the promise of endless growth now echoed with announcements no one heard. Airlines slashed schedules. International transfer hubs, Dubai, Doha, Istanbul, lost their lifeblood almost overnight. The logic of scale, of prestige, of always being ready for more, faced a brutal test. Recovery did not come evenly. In Asia, domestic flights rebounded first. By 2022, Chinese airports reached 95% of their pre-pandemic traffic, powered by internal demand. In Europe, the story was different. Border controls lingered. Business travel withered. Brandenburg, built for 30 million, handled less than half that number. Transfer-heavy airports revealed their weakness. When borders close and long-haul travel dries up, spare gates become stranded assets. Domestic-focused airports survived. Hubs dependent on international flows faltered. The pandemic asked a hard question. Is building for tomorrow's surge a wise hedge or an expensive gamble against the unknown? Airspace is power. In June 2017, the Gulf blockade closed the skies to Qatar overnight. Doha's runways emptied as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt sealed their borders and banned Qatari flights. Qatar Airways was forced to redraw its entire network, rerouting planes over Iran and Oman, adding hundreds of kilometers to each journey, burning more fuel and losing precious time. Hamad International's traffic fell by nearly half. Billions in revenue vanished. Dubai and Istanbul picked up the slack, their terminals swelling with new transfer traffic. In a single day, geography's advantage was rewritten by politics. What happens to a billion-dollar hub when a border closes? When a rival's gain is your loss, who foots the bill for empty gates and silent halls? Empty terminals do not come cheap. Each day, security swallows nearly a third of operating budgets. Guards, scanners, patrols are all required whether the halls are full or silent. Energy costs take another 15%, lighting endless corridors and powering climate systems for spaces built to handle crowds that never arrive. Debt payments wait behind every door, interest piling up on billion-dollar loans. In Berlin, annual operating losses reach hundreds of millions, covered by federal subsidies. In China, municipal budgets quietly absorb deficits year after year. When capacity sits idle, it is public money that fills the gap. How long can taxpayers fund the silence? Long-term forecasts still tempt planners. The International Air Transport Association now predicts global passenger growth of 4.3% per year, driven by new cities, swelling middle classes, and relentless urbanization across Asia and Africa. Some argue the gap will close as populations shift and economies expand. For these optimists, today's empty terminals are tomorrow's vital arteries. But how many years can a billion-dollar bet wait for the future to arrive? Each empty terminal is a monument to ambition, yet also to risk. Today, more than 80 new mega airports operate below half capacity worldwide. For every nation betting big on the future, the question lingers: are we building gateways for tomorrow or debt-laden symbols of overreach? The runway remains open.